Well, welcome everyone. Glad to see we've got a pretty good crowd, and I'm sure some others will start trickling in here. My name is Jeremiah Lee. I'm the Director of International Student Engagement and a Multicultural Advisor at Northwood University. And we run a lecture series called the Soup and Substance. And what the Soup and Substance lecture series is once a month. It's over lunch typically, and it's dedicated to topics related to diversity inclusion. So we've missed a couple months with the COVID outbreak, but we're happy to do this again through webinar series. And this event is actually going to be hosted by Northwood University in collaboration with the Midland Area Community Foundation's Cultural Awareness Coalition. What the Cultural Awareness Coalition, the CAC, does is it tries to promotes inclusivity and equity amongst throughout Midland County by programming, training, webinar series like this, book clubs, a lot of other ways in which we can help the community. So we here in Northwood, we're striving to make Northwood a more inclusive campus and trying to make the community more inclusive as well. So we appreciate the CAC for helping us in this endeavor, and that's how I actually got to know Andrea. So. What this soup and substance is also about, usually the speaker gets to choose the soup of the day, and I'm sorry guys, it's just out of the cards for this time. So once we get back on the ground in fall, I hope you can look forward to that. And the Soup and Substance lecture series, I do want to give another shout out. It's sponsored by Meritor Corporation. Meritor is an American corporation headquartered in Troy, and they manufacture automobile components for military suppliers, trucks, and trailers, and they're a Fortune 500 company. And they're a huge proponent of inclusivity and trying to make the world a more inclusive place. So I really want to thank Meritor for their support for making this possible. A couple other small things before I go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. On the sidebar, I see a lot of people already using it. There's a chat, event chat, where people can chat up just in general. But if you have a question for our speaker, there's a Q&A portion below that, and I'll be monitoring that. At the end of the speech, Andrea is going to be answering some questions. So if you have any questions throughout, feel free to drop those off in the Q&A area, and I'll monitor that. And after the speech is completed, we'll get to those. So please feel free to comment on that and chat amongst yourselves on the chat bar as well. But without further ado, and thank you, Dr. Stehauer, for the note there. It's good to see everybody here. So without further ado, I do want to introduce our speaker for today. Andrea Foster is going to be our speaker today, and she's going to be presenting on being a responsible ally. So Andrea is the Director of Programs and Partnerships at the Little Forks Conservancy in Midland, Michigan. She created Nature Nurture, which is an environmental program for underserved youth, teaching them outdoors conservation, mindfulness, and community connectedness. She also created the Outdoors Together, which is a hiking group for the LGBTQIA+ individuals and allies. She's on the Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force, the Midland Area Community Foundation, CAC, which I already called out, the Climate Reality Leadership Corps, and is in the 2020 cohort of the SVSU's Henry Marsh Institute for Public Policy. She's also a mentor on the Midland County Juvenile Care Center and is working on her certification in nonprofit management from Duke University. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Andrea.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeremiah. I appreciate that lovely introduction. And while I can't see any of you, I really appreciate you being here today. Just going to go through a few things, but first of all, this is, of course, on being a responsible ally. And I really love this quote: "Inclusion is not a light switch we flip on or off. It's a dimmer switch pushing slowly and steadily towards the light." And you can find more information from those folks at respectability.org. So again, Jeremiah read out my bio, and this is basically all the same stuff. So I'm going to roll through that one just right here, because we are going to discuss what a responsible ally is and what that means. So an ally is a person who uses their privilege to advocate on behalf of someone who does not have that same privilege. Privilege is, oh gosh, I guess the best thing that I can liken it to, I like to say that it's clearly something when we have white privilege, those of us who are white. We have many more privileges just by existing on this earth and the color of our skin that we have than so many others do. So that's an example of privilege, but there are very many. Allyship is an action-oriented tool. One of the first things that we learn in social justice and bias trainings is being an ally. So to be an ally, you must not only notice an injustice, but take action of that injustice by requesting correction. This can be in so many different forms, and I won't get too minute with it, but there's a lot of different ways that that action can take place. So marginalized communities. What a marginalized community is defined as would be communities confined to the lower or peripheral edge of society. Such a group is denied involvement in mainstream economic, political, cultural, and social activities due to their living conditions, lifestyles, or exclusion. So there are so many different marginalized communities. I'll list off a few, and I am well aware that I'm missing a significant portion of them just because I could name them off forever, but we won't do that to you. So people of color, LGBTQIA plus individuals, folks from the disability community, indigenous peoples, sex workers, homeless people, women, all kinds of folks fit into that marginalized community definition. We're going to talk about being a responsible ally. And what exactly does that mean? So the first one is doing the work. Learn about your privilege and put in the time and effort. There is no need for a degree in order to be a strong and effective ally. There is, however, a need to listen. Doing the work means reading books and watching films created by people from the community itself, learning about the history of that community and doing your best to see life from that perspective, fully knowing that you will never understand unless you are a member of that community, and that is completely okay. Some do nots. Do not ask a friend or acquaintance who's a member of that community to teach you. That has a lot of emotional labor attached to it, and asking them to do that when you can easily Google it yourself and find the multitudes of resources on the internet and in the library is something that you can do yourself. You can take that upon yourself. It also teaches radical self-reliance and drives us to learn on our own. For a lot of folks, if you feel that you must ask for explanations from someone in the community, this might seem really strange, but offer to compensate with time for their emotional labor. So compensate for their time and emotional labor with money, ideally. Could be a barter trade system, but even just offering, saying, hey, I understand that you doing this and you explaining everything to me that you have to live every day is a lot of labor and work for you. A lot of times that'll just really help folks feel validated and understand. Listening more and talking less. So important. Listening more and talking less looks like a lot of different things, but ideally, we don't want to speak for anyone over anyone in a community. We don't want to speak on their behalf. That's not our job. Our job is to listen. We need to make room for individuals representing these communities heard. We can do this by amplifying their voices and promoting their work. That can be on social media, it can be in person. But ideally, if people are going to learn, they need to learn from the experts, and the experts are the people living these lives and going through what they do. So when you can say, oh, this person did this amazing book, you should absolutely check it out. Here's their name, here's the information. That's a great way to amplify their voice. And standing in solidarity with someone, but not speaking over them to be heard is very important. I'll give an example. I was at a training out in the mountains not too long ago, which feels like forever ago. and wide group of people, so many different people from different walks of life. And one of them was my friend, who is a person of color, and she was explaining to the entire room what it's like being a person of color in the conservation world, and how the woods have historically not been a safe space for people of color, and Black people especially. And this guy, we're going to call him Ryan the Interrupter, just flat out interrupts her. For the person of color, Ryan the white guy says, oh, and definitely it's really hard for people of color. Like he overspoke and took her voice to tell a story that she was far more qualified to tell. And that was a really great example, and also incredibly frustrating for both her and others watching it happen who could really see that. So while this may seem difficult, sometimes it's hard when we're so used to being a leader. Maybe you're a leader in your field, in your community, in your family. It can be really hard to take a step back and let someone else step up and use that voice that they've been given to fill the room. So that's really something that we need to strive more to do in our everyday lives. And then also buying artwork and supporting local businesses, supporting the business of people in these communities is something that it could be very easy. If you have the funds, great. If not, again, amplify that, promote the work. But investing in buying local, and specifically from those in marginalized communities. Implicit bias. This is a tough one, and I'm not going to nitpick it forever because it's something that we all have no matter what. Even if we don't think we do, we absolutely have implicit biases. So an implicit bias is the attitude or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. And we've all got this little voice in our head, right? And depending on how you were raised, that voice might say different things, and you might catch yourself saying, oh my gosh, where did that thought come from? I don't remember knowing that or thinking that. And it's something that is just in there, whether we know it or not. So challenging the little thoughts in the back of our heads is really something that we can do with awareness, being aware of it, thinking before you speak and thinking before you act. When you have like a little thought in your head and it says, for instance, I grew up extremely religiously, and in pretty much all the religions I was raised in, gay people are not okay. However, I am one. So that's fun. And I've had to do a lot of work to unravel and remove a lot of things over basically my entire adult life to say, this isn't me speaking in my head, it's the religion I was raised with, or it's my parents, or it's a societal construct in general that tells us that this is not okay. And that can be really challenging. And it's challenging for all of us, but being aware of it is the first step in fixing that implicit bias. It isn't enough to know you have a broken leg, but what you do next to ensure that you can learn to walk again is key. Striving to use inclusive language. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. This is a very popular Maya Angelou quote, but for obvious reasons, and it's incredibly impactful. Change is hard, and when you have a devotion and a desire to change your thought processes, to change the implicit bias, to change how you behave and how you feel and think and act, it is a lot. And it is so much work, and it requires change. And it requires us to tell not only other people, but ourselves that, hey, I haven't always gotten it right. And I'm really trying to do better. Because with that knowing better, you have to do the action that follows it, unless you don't want to be an ally. In order to be an ally, you really have to have that action. And that action is So language itself can be really, really, really harmful and damaging. So many of us are aware of this. Everyone has been hurt by someone before. That whole hurt people concept. Language is damaging, but it can also be uplifting. Language can change our lives. It can touch us deeply in our hearts, and it can really just get to your core. And when we start to think about the words that we use every day, where they came from, what those phrases are, and you really start to look deeply into them, you may realize you have some things that you need to change. So inclusive language means the following. Learning that so much of our everyday language and actions come from a long history of racism and intolerance. And it really takes work to learn what parts of everyday life and society are offensive to members of marginalized communities. There are so many different community members and so many different types of communities. When we start looking at what language may affect or hurt someone from every one of those communities, it's a lot of work. I've never gotten it completely right, and I say that fully knowing that I work on it every day. Little things like the word lame. I might be like, oh, that's super lame. I don't like it. That's actually really offensive to people with disabilities. And ableism is probably one of the worst ones. There's so many phrases and slurs that come from things like the idea of crazy, like, oh, that's crazy. That can be really offensive to people. And these are things that I'm still learning and working through. So, I try and change that to, oh, how wild is that? Different phrasing all over the place. It just has a history, almost all of it. You may not know if you're saying something that is offensive to someone else. You may get corrected or admonished publicly even, and that can be really embarrassing and awkward. Part of being an ally and doing the work means that you have to apologize, but you also have to own that someone else is right. Because if they're a part of that community and they feel that you have just insulted them or you've said something that insults them and makes them feel wrong inside, then it is your job to not only understand but accept that and say, I'm so sorry, I did not realize. I'm going to work on correcting that. Do you have a suggestion for what I could say instead? And a lot of times they will. So the hardest thing sometimes is to admit that we're wrong and say, I am so sorry. I'm going to do some research and then just correct your behavior. Doing better. It is embarrassing and it is uncomfortable. And if I could sum up one word that encompasses all of being a responsible ally, discomfort is going to be that one word. If you're not uncomfortable thinking about these things and you are not uncomfortable exploring it within yourself, then yeah, it's you're not doing it right. You're going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. You just really have to embrace it. There are so many things we do, like adaptation of Black vernacular using the N-word anytime. If you are not a member of the African American community, you can't use that word. There's so many examples everywhere. There have been homophobic slurs that I was raised with, and people used them widely and still do. I occasionally work in high schools with youth that have been through a lot, and they were raised, many of them, in some households that don't embrace inclusive language or any of these concepts. And some of the slurs they're raised with, the language they're raised with, is just mind-blowing to me because it's things I thought people didn't even say anymore. And it's everywhere. Once you start really exploring it, it's everywhere. And you can get in so over your head. As soon as you start to feel like you're in over your head, politely excuse yourself, give yourself a day to think or breathe, but return to that. Sit there and think, why did this make me uncomfortable? How do I challenge it? How do I realize where it came from? It's so much of this is internal work in order to unlearn so much of what we've been raised with. And another one that I think is incredibly important that people don't always realize they're doing is cultural appropriation. Do not appropriate the cultures of others. So much of pop culture, even now, especially now, is cultural appropriation and little things that you may not have thought of. Again, all of this is about tiny microaggressions. And being an ally means recognizing them and, again, correcting that work. So cultural appropriation looks like adopting signatures of a culture that have been ridiculed, oppressed, and villainized for expressing themselves. Wearing a bindi when it's not a part of your religion. Wearing a Native American or Indigenous headdress. There are, obviously, this was a pretty great example. When you go to any sort of music festival, you will see a lot of cultural appropriation. Feathers, that sort of thing. It's considered appropriative. And even if you don't think so, it's not up to you. So if someone else is offended by that or feels that you're trying to take aspects of their culture that they have been historically ridiculed for or, again, villainized and blamed, so uncool. Something like having your hair braided into rows or cornrows, that was something really popular when I grew up. You'd know someone went on a cruise if they came back and their hair was braided. And, nowadays we know that that's really not okay. Any form of blackface, obviously, shouldn't have to say it. Most likely, if you're sitting here in this room, but I like to say it just in case. And then the use of vernacular. The term tribe, that's a really big one right now. A lot of, I'm in mom groups, so like the mom culture, it's like, oh, find your tribe and live, laugh, love with your tribe. And okay, cool. But tribe is not a word that is something that's ours. Indigenous cultures and people from Native American pasts, that is a word that is theirs. The word savage, for example, people use that a lot these days, also considered offensive. So again, things you don't think about, things you don't know. If someone says it's offensive, you just have to take it as it is. And you can do the research later, but you can just say, you know what, I'm so sorry. I'm going to work on that. And again, you're going to get it wrong. I've gotten it wrong so many times, but when you show that you're trying, you're actively trying, it comes through. Let's see here. Yeah, so I've kind of blown through this a little bit, but I wanted to make sure we had ample time for questions. But this is something we can all do together. I know that while we're all sitting inside, some of us are busier than ever, some of us are extremely busy at all. But if you're going to take the time to learn about allyship, you can absolutely do it within a community. And there are all these communities who have done the work for you. So the internet is at our fingertips. You have so many opportunities to learn. Just about everything has a process and a procedure you may not have known about. If you're going to go to a rally, if you're going to go to a protest, do a little bit of research on the topic itself, especially if you're not a member of that community. Something as simple as a Pride Festival. If you are not within the LGBT community, but you are an ally, you have a different role, right? We see people, if it's 20 drunk soccer moms at 1 a.m. screaming, that's going to be a little bit more offensive to someone who's been living that life for quite a while and had to go through true hardships and scared for their life on occasion. But someone has done that work for you and you can find it. So even just having the foresight to look ahead, think ahead, if you see someone else, let's say you are a white individual, a white person, and you see another white person doing or saying something super unoffensive and uncool, it's more than okay to say, hey, just so you know, this is considered offensive. And then they can do that work, or you can help show them the links and the resources for that work. As long as you're not taking the space of someone from the community or speaking over them or taking those words from them, you are more than welcome to do that work. It's really important that we work together. And as a community in general, if we don't all band together to start changing some of these things, then it's not going to get changed at all. And I think we can all most likely think of an example where in the past we may have said something ourselves or a relative said something and you go, that was not okay. And everyone always assumes it is at the Thanksgiving dinner table, but it's basically everyday life. And social media is a nightmare for so many reasons when it comes to this stuff, but it can also be a huge blessing because it's an opportunity for people to come together and explain what is the right thing to do and what isn't. So just a few notes and concepts on that. I have a slide here that I'm going to show you, and it is sources. These are not the end-all be-all. It is literally a handful of sources. I used these for some of the quotes that I saw, but also there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sources. There are so many organizations devoted exclusively to this. If you are going to consider having implicit bias training in your own organization, I highly recommend finding people from the communities that you're trying to be more comfortable around. Have them be the ones who come give you those implicit bias trainings. It can be so much more effective coming from someone who's been there. So this is my information, and I know that was probably a little bit quick and speedy, but again, I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak or ask questions. This has been recorded, and I believe we have the closed captioning option open. So if you want to watch this later or listen to it later for a quick refresher, closed captioning is available for anyone who may have vision disabilities as well. We want to just make it as inclusive as possible in all the things that we do. So that is everything I have for you here. And Jeremiah, am I missing anything? Should I do anything else?
Well, no, that was great, Andrea. Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm going to go ahead and turn off screen sharing. Is that okay?
Yep, that works.
Okay, excellent.
Before we jump into some of the Q&A, I had one question for you. We kind of skimmed past something at the beginning because I kind of stole your thunder with your bio at the beginning. So I noticed on the top of your bio, you had some pronouns at the top.
Yes.
Could you explain about the pronouns and why that's important, and what ways do you think that people can be using that to be more inclusive of others?
Absolutely. That is probably one of the easiest things you can do, and I really appreciate you bringing me back to that. I did have my pronouns at the beginning. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And there's a reason this is important. It may seem obvious to you that I identify as a female. It is not always obvious to other people, but it is something that we can do. We can add it to our emails. If you want to start inclusivity right away, at the beginning of a meeting, ask everyone their pronouns when they go around the room and introduce themselves. And this shows that you are a safe person to talk to, that you are someone who supports individuals in the non-binary, trans communities, anyone who doesn't identify as a clear-cut one way or another. And if you do, still put those pronouns there because it shows that you are a supportive individual who is allowing room and space for someone who may not have been comfortable or may not have ever been asked, but who would then like to express their gender identity through those pronouns. So you're really opening a door when you just put those three little words, however you gender identify. It could be they, them, theirs. If you are non-binary, he, his, etc. All of that is an option, but I've seen a lot of really great organizations lately add that to email signatures. That's something I put in my email signature, something you'll see at a lot of colleges, but also organizations that do any sort of inclusivity work or just want to make it known that they are inclusive will have pronouns. So I highly recommend starting that practice if you just want some small thing you can do today.
Andrea, I'm not sure if you can see the chat, but a lot of people are thanking you for your presentation. So,
I could not, but thank you. Oh, now I can.
One question for you here. I'm going to go ahead and jump on some of the questions. The first one we had was, in your opinion, have we as a society been frightened to examine our own personal privilege? And if so, how can we assist individuals to do so?
Oh, what a great question. Absolutely. I think all of this can be really scary and really frightening, and it's a little bit terrifying. Everyone's afraid they're going to do the wrong thing, and when we start turning that inside towards ourselves, like I said, it gets really uncomfortable. So yeah, I think as a society we have been scared to examine our personal privilege because I think it can really scare us to acknowledge that, yeah, I'm way more privileged than someone else just because of who I was born to. I am born in a very specific country. I may be more privileged just because I was born there. And for a lot of folks who, life may not necessarily be easy just because you are white. And so you may not want to say, yeah, I'm super privileged because you don't feel that way. But the fact is you are, because you haven't had to deal with a host of biases against you from birth. So yeah, people are absolutely frightened. And as a society, we are just starting to do this work and have that emotional intelligence to get through there. So, if you want to assist other people, you can try, but people have to want to do the work themselves. You can't force anyone to be a good ally. You cannot force someone to start examining their own privilege or start looking within. That has to be something that you as a person are individually driven to do.
Thank you, Andrea. Another question was, what might be a good age for junior high school or high schoolers to learn about unconscious bias?
I teach my 9-year-old about it. You can start teaching right away. There are a million phenomenal resources out there. A lot of those are specifically for working with kids and explaining it to children. Start right away. Kids are so smart. They get way more than we give them credit for. The concepts that kids can wrap their brain around, I've seen a lot of adults struggle with. But honestly, if they're in middle school and high school, they may already be learning this stuff. So they may even be able to teach you.
Great, thank you so much. Right. Right now, we've gotten all our question and answers. I'm going to leave a few minutes to see if anybody else has any other questions for us here.
Well, I just wanted to point out, I do have my email available. It's afoster@littleforks.org. If anyone does have questions, you're more than welcome to email me. If I'm not the person to answer it, I can point you towards resources or folks that can. But I am more than happy to talk about this anytime someone has questions and fully recognize that there's a lot I may not be able to answer, which is, again, the beauty of the internet and connectedness with others.
And as Andrea mentioned, this will be posted online. It's going to be through the Northwood's YouTube channel. We have a lot of lecture series posted there, and as she mentioned, there will be subtitles available for that. So that'll be posted here in the next few days, I believe.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate everyone for coming, and thank you for having me, Jeremiah. It's been a really great experience and fully new doing this sort of in front of people, but really in my own office.
Well, thank you so much. I think we may have one more. We have one more here.
Yes.
Find our effective ways of introducing these concepts to a mainly Caucasian workplace.
Oh, that's fun. Training. Hiring someone and paying people who do this for a living is something I highly recommend. I've been to a few trainings myself. There's a really cool organization called Heart of the Lakes, and they put together some really great implicit bias training opportunities. They hired a group called the Aparna Group and Varna Group. I can get the actual name soon. But go have someone come in and teach this. If you are someone's boss and you're all Caucasian, probably internally is not the best way to, like, you don't need to go teaching them that. They need to hear it from people who do this for a living, because there will be hard questions. And I highly recommend getting folks from outside of your own community even. Hire someone from Detroit, hire someone from Flint, hire people who have been there and done the work and have paved the way for others. But there are folks whose job it is to come introduce these concepts to your workplace. There may also be grants available to do that, recognizing that not all of you are nonprofits, but there may be funding in different places that are there for people to bring folks in and talk to them about it.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. If there's not any more questions, maybe wrapping this up just a little bit early.
Okay.
Everybody can go enjoy this super nice day.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate everyone's time today.
Thank you, Andrea.
Mm-hmm.